1,000 feet below us, its shores washed by the gentle waters of the Caribbean, lies Tobago, one of the smallest of the islands of the many which make up the British West Indies. It was here that the castaway Robinson Crusoe spent many years. You know, I'd like that myself. What more could anybody want? Palm-fringed beaches washed by the warm Caribbean waters. A little paradise of peace and quiet. Perhaps I should have said Tobago was usually a place of peace and quiet. But recently, the island was invaded by a film unit on location, and they were responsible for that uproar you saw a moment ago. 20th Century Fox made their film Heaven Knows Mr. Allison on Tobago, and for film purposes, Tobago became an island in the Pacific, the time 1943. The stars of the film are Robert Mitchum and Deborah Carr, and it's directed by John Huston. In it, Deborah plays an Irish nun, and Bob Mitchum is one of these rough, tough American Marines. They are alone on this island in the Pacific. Alone, that is, except for several hundred Japanese occupying the island. Now, a situation like this presents a lot of strong, dramatic possibilities, and believe me, they've been exploited to the full to produce a very moving and exciting film. The film stars, as a whole, are pretty well known to the general public. But the man behind the stars, the film director, is a more shadowy figure. So perhaps you may not know that John Huston is famous, or should I say notorious, for getting the last ounce out of his players. In his urge for the real thing, the genuine effect, he seems to charm the actors into doing things that any other director would pale at. For instance, during the making of Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, Deborah suffered sunstroke, blistered hands, cut feet, but even she got off lightly compared with Mitchum. He really went through it. Damaged ribs, a various and wonderful variety of cuts and contusions, and even a suspected fractured ankle. But the extraordinary thing is that, despite all that, both of them came up smiling and swearing that no one could touch John Huston. That man certainly must have charm as well as talent. Now, while they were shooting Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, we shot a little film of our own, and I'd like to show it to you. In it, you'll see some of the more dramatic moments or scenes of the film actually being shot, and you'll get to a pretty good idea of the conditions under which a film unit works on a location such as this. The huge eye of the CinemaScope camera follows the sticks of bombs as they fall on the defenseless island. To get the best vantage point for filming, this 60-foot camera tower was specially built in order that the cameras should capture the most dramatic shots of the Japanese invasion. Director John Huston and Chief Cameraman Ozzie Morris seem very happy with the spectacular results as they look down to the flaming village. The cameras pick up Bob Mitchum as he walks through the village looking at the scenes of devastation. Offshore, the Japanese invasion fleet stand by for landings. Back to the top of the tower where Ozzie Morris takes a sighting shot through the viewfinder. Meanwhile, the second camera stands by. All is ready for the sea bombardment to be filmed, and Assistant Director Adrian Price Jones fires the Very light to signal for action. Here come the Japanese invaders. Pacific veterans will remember this sort of action.
All has gone well, fortunately, for thousands of dollars have gone up in smoke in that scene. Why bother to climb trees for coconuts when you can wait for a film unit to come along and knock them down for you? So, this is the sunny Caribbean. Well, I suppose it's sour grapes, but you know, it's rather nice to think that even the West Indies has weather like this. Looks like a minor monsoon. However, it's no joke for the film company. It means a day's shooting lost, the schedule is upset, and up go the costs. On the balcony of his hotel, John looks a bit despondent as he calls off filming for the day. Old Mother Nature can be pretty cussed at times. After the deluge of a few days ago, this particular scene calls for rain. But of course, the sun is now high in the sky, and the unit have to create their own rain. Water is pumped from the lagoon and directed to sprinklers high in the treetops. Final camera check, and it's a take. Bob and Deborah are really going to get soaked in this shot. I'll bet they're hoping there's not going to be too many takes. As Deborah flees from the shack, Bob follows her. He's soon soaked to the skin in the downpour from the heavens. It may not be rain, but it's still wet. He tries in vain to make himself heard over the noise of the storm. Poor Deborah. That skirt looks pretty wet. And even Bob doesn't look too happy. Huston and Morris survey the stretch of beach they've chosen to film the sequence in which Bob, as U.S. Marine Corporal Allison, and Sister Angela hunt turtle for food. The unit at work setting up for shooting, and the heavy equipment is put into position. Powerful arcs add to the heat as Deborah's makeup is fixed. John and Ozzie Morris check camera angles with the CinemaScope viewfinder. These boys are really taking it easy. A final word to the stars from Huston, a light meter check, and the Clapper boy signals a take. Huston's not too happy. No, he wants another take from a different angle. Lights, camera. The angle is better this time. We follow them in their headlong rush to the dinghy. They're desperate for food, and desperation spurs them on. This is fine. Huston calls for this take to be printed, and Bob and Deborah paddle furiously in chase of the turtle. A second camera now picks them up from the seaward side. Before filming the next sequence, John exchanges a word with Deborah in the dinghy. They've caught it. It's turtle soup for supper. If you think Bob looks exhausted, you're dead right, he is. And Deborah has to help him aboard. However, Huston's man Friday smiles approvingly. Deborah hasn't escaped either. She bandages her cut hands with plaster. Poor Deborah. This is one location she'll never forget. The West Indians seem to have a genius for spontaneous composition. All it needs is something to spark off their imagination, and out of it comes a calypso. Well, naturally, the visit of a film company to the island couldn't be allowed to pass without being honored in song, so during the making of Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, a number of calypsos were composed. The Tobagans who were helping on the unit, given half a chance, like a break in the film work, would invariably burst into song and dance, and sometimes they really got going. And they got the unit going as well. For instance, have a look at this. It starts with a rhythmic beat on a tin.
a nail on a hammer, or anything at all which can be banged or shaken. And Bob gets in the groove. These boys can really shake a mean hip. Stan Ford, one of the electricians, joins in. Here's Adrian Price Jones. Boy, is he happy. Price Jones is certainly no square. As one artist to another, John gives him a big hand. This is indicative of the wonderful cooperation afforded the unit by the Tobagans. Nothing stands in Huston's way when he's making a film, and when a few scenes called for interior shots, he hired a local hall to fit up as a studio. And it's a halt request when filming is in progress. Incidentally, one gentleman on his way to the local races made a claim against the company for 2 winners, which he declared he had missed by being held up. Inside the makeshift studio, shooting proceeds in absolute silence. And Bob goes ahead on the tenth scene in which he steals stores from the Jap camp. On a second occasion, the ideal location for a scene happened to be rather near the roadside, and again the traffic is warned. Art director Stephen Grimes carefully arranges the branches and foliage to his satisfaction. Didn't somebody once say that nature imitates art? The cameras are ready. The arc's struck. And Huston makes a final check with his technicians. He spotted something which isn't quite right. This man is really a perfectionist. Here's the sound boom carrying the sensitive mic which will pick up the dialogue. And Huston has a word with his stars. Incidentally, Bob and Deborah carry a heavy load of responsibility, for in this film, they're rarely off the screen from beginning to end. Ready for a take. And Bob hands Deborah the crucifix he has rescued from the church, destroyed in the air raid. Good trooper that she is, Deborah never complains when her film commitments separate her from her family. But on this location, she's lucky. Her husband, Tony Bartley, has been able to join her on Tobago for a few days. She's on her way to the beach to join him. But even though this is one of her rare days away from the unit, she still has to study her script for the next day's shooting. No, not Father Neptune. It's Tony Bartley returning from an underwater fishing expedition. Now, don't spin us any of those fishermen's yarns, Tony. We saw what your catch was. The Japanese extras on their day off go in for the tough sport of kendo. Having seen them at it, Beatty is prepared to bow gracefully out of this particular branch of athletics. Incidentally, an extraordinary coincidence arose over one of the extras who was in the Japanese Navy during the war. He was on the Pacific island of Saipan at exactly the same time as one of the unit who was in the U.S. Army. No, brother, no kendo for me. Meet Irving Allen, John Huston's latest discovery. No, not a film star. John thinks he's got great promise as a heavyweight fighter. Bob Mitchum, an ex-pro himself, sparred with him and shares John's high opinion of the boy. Huston decides to have a go. John, your cigar. Extraordinary character, Huston. He's been fighter, cavalryman, journalist, actor, and film director in the course of his varied career. Hey, break there, break. Well, that was Irving Allen showing his paces. A future world champ? What do you think? The visit of the United States ship Mineral County, an LST, caused great excitement. It was open ship for one day, and the crew looked forward to meeting the stars. Every crew member who had a camera took pictures, while Deborah signed autographs. She describes with motions what it was like filming for hours in a rubber dinghy. Oh my, what a time that was. And here comes co-star Mitchum. The unanimous opinion of the crew was that Bob is as tough as the characters he plays on the screen. As one tough bosun's mate observed, he ain't no cream puff. Bob's wife Dorothy is also aboard, and his little daughter Patrina. She looks a bit bashful about all this male attention. Bob's only beef on Tobago was that he couldn't get real American coffee, but naval hospitality remedied that. Young Patrina Mitchum looks rather nervous at the top of the gangway as she prepares to leave ship. There goes Deborah safe aboard. And Bob heaves Patrina to the ship's skipper. But it's all right. They're safe. Well, it's been a wonderful day, but now it's back to the job in hand for the stars and the unit. The tracks are prepared to carry the cameras for this next sequence, and the arcs manhandled into position. The heavy film camera is placed on its track, and Director Huston views the scene through the finder. The camera picks up Bob as he rushes down to the gun emplacements on the beach. This is a tough scene for Mitchum. He spends most of it throwing himself flat on his face or being blown up. Ooh, that was a near one. Too near to be comfortable. But Huston's implacable, and he calls for Bob to do one more take. Working for John is a privilege, but it certainly has its drawbacks. Another long track backed by the camera as Bob staggers to the beach. A track forward, and the shot's complete. Well, Huston's satisfied at last, and Bob enjoys a cigarette. He's been blown up 7 times, but what the heck, it's a good picture. End of shooting, and John throws a party to express his appreciation to the unit and to all these cheerful characters who've done so much to help. Bob can afford to grin now. It's all over. And Deborah and her husband can look forward to a holiday. This kid's really in the party spirit. In fact, so is everybody. Huston smiles happily, for despite it being a tough assignment, it's been a happy one.
Well, the show's over, shooting is completed, and the film's in the can. It remains to be seen whether John Huston has found himself a world heavyweight champion, but we think he has a winner in Heaven Knows Mr. Allison, and we think you'll agree.